The F1 Focus Podcast with Welmann and Hendrik Verwoerd.
Formula One Focus. The first race of the year has been done. Australia, all that we expected, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. As usual, Hendrik Verwoerd is here to talk to me about it. How's it, Hendrik?
Yeah, how's it? We are in the thick of the season now, so it's great to be able to talk about something that actually happened on track.
The big thing about this weekend for me, apart from the challenging conditions which we'll touch on, was the performance, or probably a non-performance, of most of the rookies this weekend. We saw some of them, burst into tears, having to be consoled by Lewis Hamilton's dad. Some of them being under immense pressure not to lose the seat. Some of them under pressure for supposedly being the wrong choice. We're talking about Lawson here. Talk to me about the rookies, what you thought of their performance, and put it into context of a very, very difficult race.
Yeah, obviously, I think that the rookie that impressed most was young Kimi Antonelli, the Mercedes driver. I mean, he started 16th, didn't qualify well, obviously, started 16th, and then worked his way through, despite one spin, worked his way through the field and eventually finished fourth. Briefly fifth, but that was reinstated to fourth, and certainly he showed that he could deal with the pressure of being a rookie in his first race and driving for a top team on debut, and in very, very challenging conditions that, as you correctly point out, caught out many or most of the other rookies. In fact, also caught out a number of very experienced drivers. So let's not forget that also. Even if you have drivers like Charles Leclerc spinning, for instance, and you have people like Fernando Alonso crashing out, and you have somebody like Carlos Sainz, getting caught out in the wet conditions. So let's not forget that this was a very, very unrepresentative race, very unrepresentative conditions, and something that was really, really difficult to get used to. One can say, yes, they are rookies and they were, they are not able to deal with the kind of conditions. But you should never forget that this is the kind of thing, as I said, that can catch out very experienced drivers as well. Thinking back many, many years to race the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola, when Alain Prost, on his way to the grid in similar conditions, also spun out. And that's a four-time world champion eventually. So it can happen to the best of them. I don't think we should be too harsh on the likes of Isaac Hadjar or Jack Doohan or any of those other guys that got caught out in the conditions, Liam Lawson, amongst others. I think, we should be very, very aware that these cars, let's not forget, they weigh, let's say, 800 kilograms. And they produce 1,000 horsepower with a huge amount of torque. I don't have the torque figures, but these are cars that are extremely strong in terms of power to weight ratio. And in conditions like we saw in Melbourne on Sunday, it is really, really, really tricky to control them.
Let's talk about specifically Isaac Hadjar. He got a good seat. Racing Bulls is one of the more coveted seats for a rookie, I suppose. Started out the weekend well, qualified well, and then spun out on the warm-up lap, like you just said. Now, the big controversy about him is the fact that he was crying on the way to the pit lane. Anthony Hamilton, Lewis's father, consoled him, which I thought was a very nice gesture. And then Helmut Marko came along and just, being obnoxious again, saying that it was embarrassing and the likes. I mean, these are just human beings. He's young. That's the other thing people forget about these rookies. They're so young. They're emotionally not really, I don't think they're mature enough really to handle these emotions, and to be so disappointed, your first race, get the opportunity to start in Formula One, to be in a proper Formula One team as well, and then to crash out on a warm-up lap. You can understand why he was upset and why he was emotional. Talk to me about Helmut Marko's reaction, man. I don't like that kind of thing.
No, I don't either. I mean, he's really old school. Helmut raced in the 60s, so that's the kind of perspective that he has. Those were the days when you had to be ready to die. That you didn't know when if you went out that you would actually come back alive. So that's the kind of perspective that he has. Obviously, those days have passed. I think society has moved on, and I think society is much more tolerant to high-profile men specifically showing their emotions. than decades ago. So yes, that he might have been embarrassed. I don't think so. I think the majority of people that saw this could understand, as you say, exactly why he felt so emotional. Young Hajar. These guys have been dreaming of making their Formula One debut in many cases since they were 4 or 5 years old. And now they get the opportunity, and then conditions are so against them, and something happens that they did A, maybe not expect, and B, were maybe not properly prepared for. Nobody's fault, but that's just the way it is. And then something like that happens, and of course, he feels bad for dropping the team. So all of those things together, and let's not forget that this is not the first time that Formula One drivers have shown emotions. I've seen Michael Schumacher in tears myself, personally. The day at Monza in 2006 when he announced his retirement, I was there and sitting in that press conference when he was in tears, Michael Schumacher. Ayrton Senna has been in tears on a number of occasions from emotion. Winning in Brazil, for instance, that time when he won there, when he was in so much pain that he couldn't get out of the car. We probably all remember Mika Hakkinen in the late 90s when he was leading the race at Monza, and he spun out, and he went on, and he sat down and he was in tears as well. Those are not guys that you will say are softies, really. Those are hard, world champion guys, people that can dish it out as hard as they can receive it. So, and they showed the emotion. So what is the problem with a 20-year-old rookie that disappoints himself probably more than anybody else would have been disappointed in him? So he's showing that emotions, and I think that's fine. We want to see these drivers as human beings that are also emotionally filled with emotions, whether they are ecstatic about a performance or whether they are in tears about a disappointing situation. That's what we want to see, as far as I'm concerned, and I welcome that. And kudos to Anthony Hamilton. I mean, he's the one that knows how hard it is for a young man, his son, to come through the trials and tribulations that they had to come through until eventually the two of them ended up on top. And so he knows exactly what it takes and why. And I assume that there have been many similar disappointments in his family's life when they were dealing with Lewis Hamilton's racing in his young days. So he understood exactly what happened, and I think absolutely fantastic to show in his Ferrari clothing. He came in his Ferrari branded with his Ferrari branded headphones. He came and he put an arm around, and they actually went into Isaac's private room together, and there they had a long talk. And basically, apparently, and this is what Hajar said afterwards, that he just told him, look, just straighten your back, forget about this, put it behind you, and go forward. So I think that was absolutely amazing.
Talking about the other, not so much a rookie anymore, Liam Lawson. I mean, he's had a couple of races in the past 2 years where he either first stood in for Daniel Ricciardo and then replaced Daniel Ricciardo permanently. And now he's been promoted to Red Bull. Obviously, didn't do as well as expected. He was the only rookie, as far as I know, who never drove on this track before. And then because of technical problems, he didn't have that much time to prepare. To free practice 3, he sat out mostly. And in the race itself, then, he qualified badly, and then he didn't do that well in the race. So obviously the noises started going up about, it was the wrong choice, should have promoted Yuki Tsunoda to the Red Bull team. Another one of those examples that you just mentioned, where we shouldn't jump to conclusions based on one very unusual, extraordinary race almost. What did you think of Lawson's performance in this race and in this entire weekend?
Well, he's a known entity. We know what he can do. And he was very far away from that level over the weekend for various reasons. Technical problems during practice. He didn't get all the practice that he needed, as you correctly point out. He's the only driver in the entire field that hasn't ever driven that track before. And you've got to know the track. It doesn't matter how many hours you spend in the simulator. The actual track experience is the one that you need. And the racing conditions. And the other guys have all raced there in junior formulas. Lots of things counted against him, and because of his technical problems, he couldn't qualify well, and then he was given a change They tried to set up his car, I think, for wet conditions, so therefore he had to start from pit lane, and from there onwards, really, in those conditions that we have been discussing, he was never going to recover to anywhere close to where Max would have been. Having also, said that, let's forget, and I think we've made this point before, that team is built around Max, not necessarily against his teammate, but around Max. And the car is developed in a direction that favors Max. And you cannot blame the team for doing that. So therefore, he's got an additional, hill to climb in that team to overcome. Not only just being a youngster. I think we are far too early in the season to come to any kind of conclusion as to Liam's performance in comparison to Max Verstappen. So, let's wait another 2 or 3 races. Let's see what happens when he gets the full opportunity to practice and to qualify properly. Next race, next weekend is not going to be one of those. It's a sprint weekend, so they only have the one practice session. So we need to give him a few more races to show what he can do. As I said, I mean, we know what he can do obviously in a different team, but in racing conditions, he scored in, what was it, his 3rd race for then RB team. He scored a point, so he can do it. We know he can. We know he's very fast. So let's just give him some opportunity. Max is always going to dominate that team, and let's not forget that Red Bull wants a number 2 driver. His job is not to challenge Max for the win. His job is not to challenge for the World Championship. His job is there to score as many points as possible. And this was the job that Sergio Perez couldn't do. His job is to score as many points as possible. If Max, for some reason, cannot score points, or if Max scores points, he's got to be there as close as possible behind him to maximize the points that the team can win over the weekend. So that is his job, and that is how he's going to be measured this year. And if he does that successfully, his place, I think, is going to be cemented at Red Bull.
I don't want to call him a rookie because he's probably the most experienced rookie in the history of Formula One. He's a rookie in Ferrari, though. There's Lewis Hamilton, 7 times world champion, 105 victories. But a rookie in a new team, a very storied team like Ferrari.
Ferrari rookie, yes.
A Ferrari rookie, a cultural problem. We saw the communication with his engineers, not the best that you've ever seen. They know they're going to do a bonding session, apparently. What did you think of Hamilton's debut at Ferrari?
Well, I think all of us, and I include myself in that also. I think last weekend I mentioned the possibility that he could even win his first race at Ferrari, but in reality that was never going to happen. First of all, he never had the kind of testing opportunity with a current car that the likes of Nigel Mansell had when he joined Ferrari, and even Fernando Alonso had when he joined Ferrari. So, you really did not have the opportunity to get to know the new car. It's not the same if you drive an older spec car, 2-year-old car. And also one should not underestimate the difficulty in the cultural differences between a British-based team like Mercedes and an Italian-based team like Ferrari. The cultures are completely different. The way that people communicate with each other, the way that they are either open or masked in how they give feedback. And of course, we saw that very clearly in the communications, the radio communications between him and Riccardo Adami, his new race engineer, who incidentally, used to be Carlos Sainz's engineer. So, both of them are used to working in specific ways. Lewis, obviously, for many years, was it 12 years or so, he had Bono with him. And they had a lot of time to get used to each other. Somebody said afterwards, if you go back to the communications between Hamilton and Bono in their first race together at Mercedes, when was it? 2012, I think. It was even before that. The 2014 dispensation.
2013,
when he joined Mercedes. It's the first time that they worked together. They probably had a similar kind of, let's say, incomplete communication between them. So it's to be expected. I think most of us did not quite expect it to be at that level. because Lewis wants certain information under certain conditions, and his engineer is not quite sure what kind of information he needs because they don't know each other that well. And sometimes he wants more, sometimes Hamilton wants less information. I think what they need to do, if they're listening to us here, they should go into the simulator, the two of them. I'm not sure that they'll be able to do that before this weekend's race. Go into the simulator and do a number of race distances together with different conditions and different circumstances and even different things going wrong. Because when things go wrong, that's when communication tends to break down. So maybe that's what they need to do. Go and spend a day in the simulator, do 3, 4, 5 races, and some could be wet, some could be difficulty in pit stops. Anything can go wrong. And get to know each other that way. It's going to take a while. It's still going to take a while. It's going to put him back, I think, Hamilton. So I don't think we should expect too much from him until we get to the 4th or the 5th race of the season, when he should have been able to sort most of these problems out. But it could even take longer than that.
We saw a pretty good example of that lack of communication, let's call it that, when Charles Leclerc was complaining about water in his car, and his engineer said, "Yeah, it must be the water." And Charles Leclerc actually said, "You must put that in the words of wisdom or something." I mean, Ferrari just cannot help themselves. They keep falling over their own feet. Lewis was leading the race at one stage, but it was because they were on the wrong tires at that stage. They made the wrong calls because, like you said, he either had too much information at the wrong time or too little information at the right time. So you never knew where he was because the communication was lacking. And those little clown memes of Ferrari doing the rounds again, with the clown sitting on the pit wall. I wonder if Ferrari will ever get out of their own way.
Again, this was not a representative race, and that gamble could have gone either way. They decided to stay out an extra lap or two when the rain came down. If they were correct that the rain wouldn't last that long, they would have been the heroes. They would have been right at the front. So again, let's not make this a representative race. Yes, Ferrari tends to get things wrong, but less and less so, I think. We saw that last season. Less and less so. A number of other teams also got the same sort of,
including McLaren.
Including McLaren, getting these strategic decisions wrong. Although I think in McLaren's case, they certainly showed that they did not panic the way that they would have done similarly last year, in a similar situation last year. So they didn't panic, and certainly it seems McLaren has learned. The entire team has learned, and that was one of the impressive things, I think, of the victory by Lando Norris, where he didn't panic, especially at the start. We saw him at the start. He got away not that fast, but he kept his head cool. Fortunately for him, Piastri protected him into the first corner, but then he went wide, and then Max was on his tail, and still he kept cool, Norris. So, things didn't quite develop to the same level that they did last year on a number of occasions, but still, I think that it is clear, I think, that Lando Norris and the team on the pit wall also, they've learned some lessons. They didn't fall in some of the traps that they would have fallen in similar situations last year. So it all bodes well for them.
Yeah, same with Lando not succumbing to the pressure from Max pushing him from behind. Max couldn't overtake him because there was only one racing round, but Max was trying to get him to make a mistake. And then take advantage of it, and he didn't crack under that pressure. But talking about the McLaren now specifically, the car's not only fast; it's very gentle on its tires, and that was something that Christian Horner also remarked on. The Red Bull could sort of keep up with the McLaren, and then their tires fell away, whereas the McLaren just went on their merry way. That period in the race where there wasn't really any rain, or just almost a normal race, even though there was still on intermediates, that McLaren seemed pretty damn fast.
Yes, and Lando could control his pace at that point, so that meant that he could control the degradation on the intermediate tires much better than probably anybody else. Yeah, I think the defining characteristic of this year's McLaren is that it is such a well-balanced car that it means that it doesn't work its tires hard. When a car is not well balanced, it either slides at the back or it slides at the front. Either has understeer or it has oversteer, and that of course generates heat or it generates degradation in the tires. So if a car is balanced enough, is so well balanced that it doesn't do that, then it means the tires will last much longer, and they don't generate heat in the tires, which is not what you want. Having said that, of course, one has to be careful. Some tracks you do want heat in your tires. On this particular occasion, you didn't need that, and McLaren obviously beforehand said that they don't really expect to do well in Melbourne because it's not a track that suits their car. Well, I mean, if this track doesn't suit their car, what are they going to do on tracks that actually do suit their car? But there are certain tracks where you do need to generate heat in order to generate the grip. It also depends, I think, on the compound of tire, but in general, one should again not take this as necessarily as a representative race in terms of the handling characteristics of the McLaren. We'll have to wait and see again the first 3, 4, 5 races when you have a mix of tracks and a mix of conditions, mix of track temperatures, mix of ambient temperatures, mix of wind conditions, stuff like that. All of those factors play a role. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think, from a McLaren point of view, it was interesting that Lando actually admitted after the race in an interview that they are the favorites for the championship. A driver shouldn't easily say something like that unless they know and unless they're confident enough to be able to do that. So yeah, I think it's significant that he was confident enough to say that yes, McLaren is the favorite this season. What he didn't say, of course, was which one of the two of them would be the favorite for the Drivers' Championship. And that is going to be, we've said this before, that is going to be one of the intriguing narratives. That's the word that people use these days, storylines of the season, the battle between the two McLaren drivers. Because certainly Oscar Piastri wasn't happy when he was told that they need to go on station at a point in the race. Although even though that made a lot of sense, they were not struggling, but they were going past some back markers in very difficult conditions. So it made sense for the team to say, look, let's just hold station now until this is all settled, and then you can race again. But Oscar wasn't happy with that. Unfortunately for him, things got a little bit worse later on.
That's the thing I was about to ask you. The fact that he was told to back off, but do you think it maybe broke his concentration? Because he made a mistake right after that, and then he slipped off at one stage. He and Lando both went off in the same corner. Lando managed to save it. Piastri didn't. Piastri eventually, you called it one of the funniest moments you've ever seen in Formula One. Just sort of, rolled back in reverse kind of a thing until he found some traction again, fought back to get to ninth position and scored 2 points. What do you think the fact that they told him that he was upset and it cost him a bit in terms of concentration? What do you think?
I don't think so. I think Oscar doesn't really get thrown by things like that. I think he's too even-keeled for that. When the two of them in the same corner, was it turn 12, I think, just before the end of the lap, they were the first to arrive when the rain arrived, when that heavy rain shower arrived. So they were the first to arrive. Lando was fractionally ahead in terms of hitting the rain. And when Oscar got to the same point, the rain was already heavier. I mean, they were like, what are they, 50 meters apart or something like that at that point. So, they were the first, they were the leading cars to actually hit that spot of rain. So that's why both of them were caught out. I don't think that's got anything to do with whether anybody was upset about anything else. I don't think Oscar gets thrown by anything like that. Yeah, I did make a little bit of a mistake, but how many drivers didn't make mistakes in that race?
Let's talk about Max. You mentioned earlier that the team is built around Max and the car is designed for Max. Krishna Horner said after the race, they said they figured out why the Red Bull was struggling against the McLaren. And on Monday, the FIA put out a new notice that they're going to do more strict tests on the rear wing, the gap between the two planes of the rear wing, reducing it from 2 millimeters to 0.75 for China specifically, which is a special dispensation. Then from then on, going to be only 0.5 of a millimeter, that little gap or whatever you call it. Do you think that's maybe what he was referring to, that Red Bull thinks they might have found out something, reported McLaren for something? We know Red Bull reported McLaren and Ferrari. And Ferrari, both those teams were visited by the FIA, but they were all deemed legal in Australia. Now suddenly they're clamping down. There must be something to it. I wonder what the story is behind that.
Well, I mean, this thing comes from last year already. I'm not aware that Red Bull, particularly in Australia, complained about that. It could be. I'm not aware of that, but I mean they complained last year. So what the FIA did before this race, they told all the teams that they needed to put cameras on the wing, on the rear wing, specifically the rear wing, similar to what they did in Belgium last year to the front wing, so that you can then measure what happens while the car is in motion. You can make marks, and you can then see whether the plane opens or closes or flexes under high speed conditions. So that is what they did. They announced it, and so they found the FIA. I don't think this was at the initiative of any team. I don't think any team actually alerted them to anything. The FIA was ready to investigate that situation. And then they found that, yes, some of the teams didn't really comply. So they decided, okay, they're going to make it much more strict for the coming race with a little bit of a tolerance. They will have 0.25 of a millimeter tolerance. We're talking fractions here. We're really talking very, very small little difference. But at the 300 k's an hour, that does make a difference. So, I think what Horner probably referred to was some upgrades that are coming for the next few races. I saw somewhere where he said in an interview, I'm not sure who spoke to him, but he said, yeah, we kind of know what we need to do, so we are going to bring in some upgrades for the next in the period up to the next six races. Now that obviously probably means up to around about, what is the race just before Spain? I forget that. Spain is the mark where people will have to have redesigned their front and their rear wings. So I think Horner also said that this car, the RB21, is much more flexible in terms of what it can do. The operating window is much wider than last year's RB20, so they can do more things to this car, for this car, to make it a little bit more driver friendly than last year's car, which was very peaky in its performance. I think that's what he was referring to when he said, yeah, we know what to do, and we are going to bring in some upgrades for over the course of the next few races.
Mercedes, I think they must have been disappointed. Yeah, Kimi Antonelli did well, and they finished on the podium, but simply because everybody else sort of fell off the track there. Once again, I think Mercedes are going to be there or thereabouts. Nothing spectacular. We asked you before. Do you think they're going to write this year off and focus on next year's car? Because clearly they're not.
Things tend to change. I think some teams would have maybe thinking. They might have been thinking about. I'm not saying Mercedes, but some teams might have thought about the idea of let's see what happens in the first race or two or three, and then maybe switch if things don't work out. I think it's too early to say that. McLaren particularly has said we are not going to stop developing this car. So they know that if you have the chance to win the championship, you better take that chance, because that chance may not come again. Ask BMW. In 2009
that was Braun was 2009. I remember we talked about Robert Kubica those days.
When BMW when Sauber was basically BMW. Anyway, so when you get the opportunity, you use that. You don't play for next season unless you know very much about what's going to happen next season. So I think McLaren is going to continue. I don't think Mercedes is going to throw the towel in. I don't think any of the top 3-4 teams is going to do that. I think they're going to try and juggle the two development paths as far as they can. I see now in the new Concord agreement that all the teams have signed that the cost cap is now being increased from 135 million to 220 million dollars
a year.
A year, but including a lot more expenses than what was provided for the previous one. I mean, these things are very secretive anyway. But apparently, yes, the cost cap is now up to 220. But that would include a number of things that weren't included in the previous one.
Okay, tell me about the teams that impressed you. I mean, Williams for me stood out, even though, Sainz lost control of it, last corner, same story, safety car, and the likes. But we know that was a spike. It wasn't something that he didn't make a mistake. It was something to do with the car.
Yeah.
And then he went and helped sort out the strategy for Albon. Williams, you're all wondering about their pace, but they did well. They qualified properly, and on merit. And then in the race itself, Albon was right there. And he actually ended ahead of Antonelli, not on that track, but because of a 5-second penalty, which was later reversed. Williams stood out for me.
Yeah, no question about it. And in dry conditions, in qualifying on Saturday, they got 2 cars inside the top 10 on merit. So there's no question about that the team has improved a lot. Again, maybe not representative in terms of the entirety of the rest of the season. The circuit is not representative, but still, if you can qualify in the top 10 on merit in any race, that says that the team is well inside the picture. And I think that's brilliant. I think it's fantastic to see that from Williams. That's one of the founding teams virtually. Not quite, but I know they go back so many years. And it's always sad to see a team like that struggle at the back of the field. So it's fantastic to see them coming back and working their way up. And that's exactly what James Vowles, the team principal, has had in mind over the last few years. Just quickly on the Carlos Sainz situation, something that I kind of picked up. And again, I'm not a technical guru. I certainly I'm not going to claim that I understand exactly how these things work. But the way I understand it, that peak, the torque peak or spike rather, that caused Carlos Sainz to spin off in those conditions, basically happened in between gear shifts. When he was shifting, I think it was from 3rd to 4th or 4th to 5th or something like that. What these guys do is they keep the foot flat down on the accelerator, and they shift their gears, obviously with the pedals on the steering wheel. But we must always remember that these are not CVT gearboxes, constant velocity transmissions. There is still a fraction of a second in the change between the one gear and the other. The gears still have to physically. There's no cone where there's no break between the gears, or there's a constant velocity. So these are still separate gears that have to be changed, the one from the other. And in that fraction of a second between the two of them, the driver doesn't take his foot off the pedal. He basically keeps his foot on, whether it's flat out or halfway, doesn't matter. He keeps his foot in the same position when he changes gear, and that fraction of a second between the two gears, apparently, the torque spike between the two of them, that caused the rear wheels to lose traction, and that is why it spun out. I'm probably simplifying this far too much, but that's the way I understand it. That's the way it actually makes sense to me. So it's something that one doesn't, it's not a problem in dry conditions, obviously, but when the conditions are so slippery as they were, in Australia, that's another factor was obviously the nature of the asphalt on that particular track is different from every other track, and apparently when it's wet it becomes very, very slippery and like a mirror, they were often described as. So in conditions like those, that little fraction of a second of a torque spike can actually cause a car to spin off. So again, if anybody watches and understands it better than me, welcome to comment on that. Maybe I got it completely wrong, but that's the way I understand.
I had the same impression. That's why I also understood. I just also don't understand the technical side of it. But talking about drivers spinning out from probably hitting the white line during that split second you're referring to, and a guy that also sort of broke our hearts because we know that he's under a lot of pressure here. In his home race, Jack Doohan, Murphy's motorcycle world champion, father in the pits, spins out on the warm-up lap or the first lap. I mean, that's possibly the worst start that he could have hoped for, or could have, in his worst nightmare, he would have hoped for this to happen. How precarious is his position really? Because he did pretty damn well in the qualifying. He was very fast, on a par with Gasly. And again, unrepresentative race, difficult conditions, caught him out. Do you think this might be a death knell for him? Does he still have a chance to prove himself?
I would hope personally that Alpine, and specifically Oliver Oakes, the team principal, is far more mature in their evaluation of his performance over the weekend than a lot of people who just instantly reacted, knee-jerk reactions, saying, "Yeah, that's another nail in his coffin." Colapinto is watching him over his shoulder, and this is the last thing that he needed, Jack Doohan, because he's under pressure. Maybe he's not going to last until the middle of the season, that sort of thing. I still think he won't last until the middle of the season, but I do not think that this was necessarily another nail in his coffin. Again, we've said this on a number of occasions now. This was not representative. Sunday was not representative, and the track is not representative of the rest of the season. And as you correctly point out, Jack Doohan was very quick in practice. He was really just fractions of a second, less than tenths of a second, if I remember correctly, off Gasly in practices. In qualifying, unfortunately, he was unfortunate that there was a yellow flag, if I remember.
Yeah, for Lewis, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. Lewis spun around, and so therefore he couldn't really show what he could do in qualifying. So therefore he qualified 14th, and Pierre Gasly was 9th. He made the top 10. So the bare facts on paper don't tell the full story. And I'm pretty sure that the Alpine team and those that make decisions, maybe with the exception of our big friend, maybe the decisions
Flavio Briatore.
Maybe those guys will not just look at the paper, and they will decide, make a decision based on more comprehensive analyses of performance. But I don't think that this was necessarily another nail in his coffin. I couldn't remember Flavio's name. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's a name to remember, especially Formula One. You have to watch over your shoulder all the time, and that guy's around. All right, let's lastly talk about Haas. I mean, Sauber did better than expected, but mostly due to the conditions. Haas, I think, disappointed for me. They looked good in practice, and in the testing sessions, they didn't look that bad. But they were nowhere in this race. Qualified last and second last. Bayman had a nightmare over the practice rounds. Didn't have that bad of a race, but still, Haas to me probably the disappointment of this weekend.
Yeah, I don't exactly know why. I assumed when they were taking it easy during testing in Bahrain that they're doing exactly what they did last year to such good effect, and that is to work on the basics of the engineering of the car, to eliminate things that could make the car unreliable or slow, and maybe work on those aspects. Maybe they still have a few of those gremlins to work out from the car. Ollie Behrman obviously was very unlucky. He had numerous, or not numerous, he had a few technical difficulties, and then again his car was changed in Parc Fermé, so he was also forced to start from the pit lane. So from there on, he really wouldn't be able to do much. So I think the jury is a little bit out on him. We also know what he can do.
Yeah.
He shone last year when he stood in for Carlos at Ferrari. He shone when he stood in for Kevin Magnussen at Haas last year. So again, one shouldn't take this as a definitive definition of what he's capable of doing this year. Let's wait and see. Unfortunately for them, things didn't quite work out, and it's just Ocon again, more experienced, obviously, but we also know what he can do. So I think one should just be patient on that. As far as Sauber is concerned, you just quickly mentioned Sauber. Yes, that was another team that was a bit of a surprise. We will not forget last year at the same time. Australia last year was the third race or fourth race, but still they were suffering from pit stop problems where they would
40-something seconds. Yeah, I remember.
Long pit stops and stuff like that. So all of that has been eliminated. And things are looking up, I think, for Sauber, soon to become Audi. But again, it's early in the season. Let's wait and see.
You actually answered my question before. I was about to ask you, is McLaren going to focus on this car, or they're going to check out, because George Russell made the comment that McLaren can just, for all intents and purposes, forget about this year because they're so good, they're so far ahead of everybody else. Lando made a point of saying that's not true. They're still going to be developing and everything. So if we have to try and make an educated guess about what we saw in terms of form, give me a pecking order from 1 to 4. The top 4. Is McLaren really that far ahead? Is
I
really
think
Red
so.
Bull really that far behind? Is Ferrari,
You
did
know,
they have a bad weekend, or they're slow? What do you think?
how much behind the others, how much the others are behind McLaren, that's very difficult to say. I mean, is it 0.3 of a second? Is it 0.6, 0.7 of a second? That we cannot tell after the first race. Even the first qualifying, it's you cannot take that necessarily as a measure. But I think it's quite clear from what we saw this weekend that the McLaren is ahead of the pack. There's no question about that, and they can build on this. When you're ahead, you can build on this. Just an interesting little snippet that I also picked up afterwards, and that is that the record that Max Verstappen held as leading the championship has now been broken. Obviously, continues leading the championship. That lasted from the Spanish Grand Prix in 2022 onwards. He has never been headed in the championship, in the Drivers' Championship. 1,029 days. This is now the first time and that is a record. He even overtook Michael Schumacher in the process in terms of consecutive days leading the championship. But anyway, so Red Bull, I think, is right there in the mix behind McLaren. They are certainly behind McLaren. Difficult to say about Ferrari because there were various factors, and I don't think Hamilton has found his feet there yet. As a team, they are a little bit hamstrung in terms of both drivers getting the maximum. And Mercedes, obviously, I think between those three, obviously they are the three behind McLaren. That doesn't take a rocket scientist to work that out. What the gaps are, I'm not so sure. I think the order behind McLaren between those three is going to change in the next few races. I think, when we see coming up is the Chinese Grand Prix, then Japan, then Bahrain, and then Saudi Arabia. So, different tracks, different conditions. But I have no doubt that they are the chasing pack behind McLaren. And I'm also going to go out on a limb and say, I think they are going to win. These three teams are all going to win sometime early in the season. I think that's something that I'm looking forward to anyway.
I wanted to ask you a bit of a curveball question just to finish off. Why is McLaren suddenly so successful? And is it the right thing to say that it's suddenly? Is it Andreas Stella? Is it Zach Brown? Is it Rob Marshall? I mean, I think we didn't realize how much of an effect Rob Marshall had on that team coming over from Red Bull last year. What do you think this success is can be attributed to?
I think it's all down to Zach Brown choosing the right people, putting them in the right places, and them then all getting together as a team. That is the secret. That was the secret at Ferrari for all those years. In Jean Todt's years and Michael Schumacher years. That's the secret at Red Bull. In the Sebastian Vettel years, and also, of course, now in the Max Verstappen years, you have to have all the ingredients, the right people in the right positions, and they have to work together. And that is, I think, just maybe as an aside, it's maybe a subject we can talk about later in the season. That is something that a team like Aston Martin needs to get right. They have spent a lot of money, new facilities, brand new wind tunnel, everything like that. They've spent a lot of money getting the right technical team together, Adrian Newey and the other people around him. But that is no guarantee of any success. We saw in the past Toyota spending probably the most that any team has ever spent in Formula One, and not with a single win. Money doesn't guarantee success. This is also not my point of view. It's just simply a fact. Money doesn't guarantee success, but money is needed for success. So you need to spend the money to get everything, all the elements together, and those elements have to gel and work together as a team. And if you think about the fact that a couple of years ago, McLaren was right at the back of the field, and we can even think back to a few years further back when Fernando Alonso was joking about the Honda engine, that he was driving a Formula 2 car. That's from as far that they have come now. They are now in a position to actually defend the Constructors' Championship and to try and manage their two drivers in order to also clinch the Drivers' Championship. So, that's how far the team has come. And it's all down to Zach Brown. Do not underestimate the way that he has been able to manage this whole situation, steer the team in the right direction. He's had to navigate all those waters and them selling off their factory, all those kind of things. He needed to navigate the team through all of that.
That's an important point that you make there. There's a saying that says the sum of the parts must be greater than the whole. And that's what's happening at Aston Martin. They've got all these great things, but nobody's putting them together. That's the difference. You're absolutely right. I think,
Yeah, let's give them the chance. Not yet, but I think, they need to do that if they aim from 2026 onwards. Obviously, their aim is going to be 2026 onwards. If their aim is to be competitive in terms of both championships, they need to get rid of Lance Stroll. They need to get a proper driver there. Lance was good in Australia, but that's what he does. He tends to shine on a number of occasions, but not consistently so. He's not able to back up Fernando Alonso when Alonso scored numerous podiums. When was it? Last year, the year before.
23,
But Lance was nowhere. He wasn't able to back him up. So, that team needs to get two strong drivers. They've got one already. They need two strong drivers, along with the technical team that they've got at the moment and the facilities that they've got at the moment. Those things should be in place for 2026 if they've got any hope of challenging for any of the two championships.
Hendrik, thanks, man. This weekend is China. Of course, you mentioned last time it's a sprint race as well, and you won free practice and the like. So I'm looking forward to this, and I want to see what the effect of this new ring regulations is going to be, if it's going to affect McLaren. I think McLaren is probably going to be affected most, from what I can gather, but we'll see. I'm looking forward to this one.
Absolutely, it's not as early for us in South Africa this time in the morning, but still, remember that we've got qualifying on for the sprint on the Friday afternoon. And then we've got the sprint race on Saturday morning, and then we've got qualifying for the race itself later on Saturday, and the Grand Prix, I think, is on 9 o'clock South African time on Sunday.
That's it's a civilized time. It's better than this past weekend. Okay, Hendrik, thanks, man. Appreciate it. It was a pleasure talking to you, as always.
The F1 Focus Podcast with MV Velman and Hendrik Verwoerd.